Hello, and welcome to today's webinar on #Medicine2 sexual misconduct within the healthcare workforce. My name's Catherine and I work for Doctors in Distress, and we are an independent charity providing mental health support to all healthcare workers across the UK. And we do this through programmes of peer support groups and specialist-led webinars such as this one. As I mentioned earlier, this session is recorded, but only Chelsea and I can be seen, and you can remain anonymous by changing your name in the chat box if you wish, whatever is most comfortable for you. So today's webinar will be led by Emergency Medicine Registrar and co-founder of Surviving in Scrubs, Dr Chelcie Jewitt. There will be time at the end for any questions, but please do feel free throughout to pop any questions you may have either in the chat or in the Q&A feature, and we will be sure to come to those at the end and answer them. So thank you everyone, and I will now pass over to Chelsea.
Okay, I'll just get my screen up. Lovely. Can you see that?
Yes.
Smashing. So hi everyone. Thanks Catherine for the introduction. So my name's Chelsea and I'm one of the founders of Surviving in Scrubs, and I'm going to talk to you today a bit about who we are as an organisation and what our campaign does. Talk a bit about the prevalence and the issues of sexism and sexual misconduct within the healthcare workforce, and then after no doubt depressing you all quite a lot, hopefully getting towards the end on a bit more of a positive note in terms of what we can all do at an organisational level, but also at an individual level in order to try and combat this damaging culture and hopefully make the workforce and the workplace a much happier place to work going forward. So Surviving in Scrubs, who are we? What do we do? Surviving in Scrubs, at our core, we are an organisation that mainly focuses on what you can see on our website. So our website, the QR code's down in the bottom there, leads you straight to our website. And on this website, anyone who works in healthcare, be they doctors, nurses, students, healthcare assistants, admin staff, anyone, can anonymously submit their stories, their experiences of sexual misconduct within the workplace onto that website. It's done through a contact form, and then myself and Becky, the other half of the operation, we read through them all, ensure they are as anonymous as possible, and then upload them onto our website. So as it stands, we have, I think, 215 stories on there. Some are a couple of lines, some are a couple of pages long. So there's a real variety there. And this is what Becky and I started. I think we started it about 18 months to 2 years ago now. And we've managed to do quite a lot of things with it. We've managed to get into quite a lot of important rooms. But to take you back a step, this whole, I hate the word journey, but this whole journey started off the back of my own experiences and Becky's own experiences. So Becky and I, 3 years ago, had never met, had barely even spoken, but I had experienced sexism at work. I'd also experienced harassment and unfortunately sexual assault at work as well by my colleagues. And Becky has a similar background in that she'd also experienced these. She initially started off as an academic surgical trainee, but due to the culture that she found throughout multiple rotations in surgery, she then changed to general practice and is now a GP with a specialist interest in gynecology and women's health. So though we both have similar experience in the workforce, we've actually come from very different clinical backgrounds, and we're in different parts of the country. I'm up in Merseyside and Becky's down in Oxford. And Becky got in contact with me about March, April 2021. And that was off the back of a piece of work that I'd done with the BMA, so the BMA Sexism and Medicine Survey and Report, which I'll be talking about a little bit as we go through this presentation today. And that piece of work was published in August 21, and the headline news from that was that 91% of female doctors had experienced sexism at work. So Becky got in contact with me, saying that, you know, she'd experienced this. Really nice to, you know, get in touch with somebody who's like-minded, wants to do something about it. And we were both really kind of motivated, and like, you know, this is in the not only the medical media, but the mainstream media. Great, fantastic. So, you know, what's going to happen? We're looking forward to all this change. And then nothing nothing really happened. There was a real lull in terms of, you know, all right, the problem had been identified, but what was going to change? What were organizations going to do about this? And so we'd had a couple of chats online. We did a few Zoom meetings. You know, this was still COVID, on again, off again. And then we met up in, I want to say April 22, in the middle in Birmingham, in a semi-dodgy pub, and over a questionable bottle of wine, decided to make Surviving in Scrubs. And again, it goes back to the voices of the survivors, that collective narrative. We realized that there was so much power in that in order to drive change. And it is because of those voices, it's because of every single individual that has, you know, given us the privilege of telling us their story, that we've been able to go into NHS England, NHS Scotland, Wales, GMC, BMA, the RCN, multiple Royal Colleges, the ambulance service, loads and loads of large stakeholder organizations, to say to them, look, this is happening in your organization. This is happening, you know, in your specialty. What are you going to do about it? So I just kind of want to set the scene in that we wouldn't be here, Becky and I, without the bravery of survivors giving us their story. So just a huge thank you for that. And I'd really appreciate if you could have a look at our website. And if you yourself have stories that you feel that you can share with us, please do so. So that's kind of us. But going forwards, I just kind of want to do a bit of housekeeping. You know, I'm going to be talking about very sensitive topics. We're talking about sexism, we're talking about sexual harassment, we are talking about assault. And throughout this talk, I will be illustrating certain points, certain themes with stories and testimonies from our website. So some of you may find that quite triggering, quite upsetting, quite emotional. And just to say, I have absolutely no issues if you need to turn me off and come back, or just turn me off and go away altogether. That's absolutely fine. Please look after yourselves whilst you're listening to me talk. And then, as Catherine mentioned, there is going to be Q&A at the end. I really encourage questions, I really encourage discussion, but to ensure that this is a safe space for everyone involved, you know, have respect for each other, be careful of the language that you are using, because, you know, you don't know who else is on this call, so just be mindful. And I'm going to start off, I'm going to ask these questions, and I just want you to have a little bit of introspection. I'm not going to ask you for your answers. It's just for you to have a real honest reflection upon your own thoughts, your own experiences. So, do you as an individual think that misogyny exists in healthcare? And have you ever experienced or witnessed sexism within your workplace? I think it's pretty obvious, bearing in mind the introduction I've given, the background that I've given you, what my thoughts are. Yes, I do think misogyny exists in healthcare, and I'm about to go over some of the facts and figures around that. And as I've already explained, I myself have experienced sexism at work as well. So here's some of the facts and the figures. These issues are becoming more and more well known. They're getting spoken about in multiple publications, not only the medical media, but also mainstream media. I think the big kind of news stories that have been out in the past few years are that BMA survey, saying that 91% of female doctors have experienced sexism at work. And then I think it was September last year when the Working Party of Sexual Misconduct in Surgery, a working group under the Royal College of Surgeons, published their paper of a survey showing that 1 in 3 female surgeons had been sexually assaulted at work. And we also have a piece of work up there on the top left from the BMA and the Guardian, and that's looking at so that's a piece of work that we consulted on, where they submitted multiple Freedom of Information Acts to all of the trusts within NHS England relating to the numbers regarding sexual assault, whether that be staff on staff, staff abused by patients, or staff abused by visitors. And, you know, you can see some of the numbers there: 21,000 reports of staff members being abused by patients, 902 of those reported incidences were staff on staff. And it's our belief, through what we know, that this is a huge underreporting. So the value is likely to be at least twice that, if not more. And I'll explain some of the barriers to reporting for staff members as I go through today. But it's not just hospitals. We can see that the paramedics have their own issues. BBC Wales have done a big news story on that, and Becky, the other half of the organisation, actually did her training in Wales, so she's got quite a lot of experience of what it's like over there. And also we know that this isn't just doctors, it is paramedics as well, but we've also got a piece there from the Nursing Times showing that 3 in every 5 nurses have been sexually harassed at work as well. So this is a huge problem, and it affects absolutely everyone. I'm just going to talk a bit about sexism and what we mean by that. So the definitions may seem a bit obvious, but not for everyone. So just to kind of give you the formal definition, sexism is the prejudice, stereotyping, or discrimination of an individual based on their sex. And misogyny is slightly different. It's the dislike of, contempt for, or ingrained prejudice against women. A lot of people assume that sexism and misogyny is interchangeable, which in some instances it can be. Misogyny is in a sense a type of sexism, but there is a phenomena called benevolent sexism, where the person who portrays sexist ideas and beliefs doesn't necessarily realize that what they're saying is sexist, because they are acting and they are saying these things in order to portray a benefit or to be kinder to a certain sex. For example, I've been told multiple times that I shouldn't go into emergency medicine. I should probably go into general practice because it's more family friendly. And this, you know, this was earlier on in my career before I had a family, and when I didn't really know what to do. Actually, it was in med school. It was really early on. It was before, you know, it's where I'd just gone into med school, and it was just assumed that I was going to be a GP because I was a woman, because I might one day have a family. And you know, I do believe that most people that gave me that advice were doing it in order to be kind to me and to be nice to me, and, you know, to make me feel supported. But actually, it took me a really long time personally to decide on doing emergency medicine, despite having loved the job as a foundation doctor. It took me an F345 to fully like nail it in and apply. And I do think a lot of that is from that well-meaning advice, which my male counterparts didn't get. Having spoken to my peers, they just didn't get that advice. They were told, yeah, go for emergency medicine, you'd be great. Whereas actually that's what I should have also been told. As a female, it shouldn't have mattered. And I think misogyny is much more obvious. It's much more obvious. It's derogatory language. It's assuming that women are less than, not as capable. And I'm going to go on to give you some examples of the differences from our website now. Oh no, I'm not. I think I'm going to give you some facts and figures first. So the data out there, again, looking at that BMA paper, I've hammered that figure home time and time again. 91% of female doctors have experienced sexism. Just to say, it was within the 2 years prior to the survey going out, so it is very contemporaneous data. We know through the work by Professor Dame Jane Dacre, the Mind the Gap report that was published in 2019, 2020, that female hospital consultants earn almost 19% less than men throughout their working lifetime. This also affects GPs. I believe that female GPs earn, I want to say 13% less than their male counterparts, and in academia, female academics are earning 12% less than their male peers as well. And please don't quiz me on the facts and the figures. I've read the paper several times. I'm just not very good with numbers, and I can't get the reasoning out my head. But I do know that this is like for like work, so it does take less than full-time working into consideration. It does take maternity leave into consideration there as well. So even with those factors kind of brought into the equations, women are still earning considerably less than their male counterparts. And we know, I'm very much focusing on the workforce, but we do know that these issues of sexism in healthcare do affect our patients. We know that female patients are less likely to receive standard treatments, whether that be in terms of analgesia at first presentation at the front door in A&E, or even when it comes to medical emergencies. So the paper that's referenced for this one is that females who present with heart attack, myocardial infarction are less likely to receive the gold standard level of care, which is primary PCI, than their male counterparts. So that in itself has a knock-on effect in terms of morbidity and mortality, purely on the basis that these patients are women, which is completely unacceptable. So just to go over a few of these stories now. I'm aware that you can all probably read these, but I'm going to just read them out anyway. When I expressed an interest in applying for surgical training, a consultant sat me down and drew me a graph of the number of my eggs decreasing as I got older and through training to try and put me off. I'm just going to let that sink in a second, just whilst I get a little drink. Oh, sorry, my voice is going. My kids brought some form of lurgy back from nursery again. This doesn't happen to men. I have never heard a man being sat down by a consultant and having a graph drawn regarding their sperm count and their increasing age. It's just ridiculous that this is an issue that women are having to cope with and deal with in this day and age. And it goes back to kind of ingrained beliefs that the primary purpose of the female body is to have children. Never mind that this individual may already have children, may have completed their family, may not want children, may be trying for children, but is unable to, might be having fertility issues, might have just had a miscarriage. There's no kind of empathy, no sympathy. It's just assumed that this woman will want children at some time, and that's unacceptable. It shouldn't be something that impacts on someone's career choices. They should be able to pursue whatever specialty they want, irrespective of what their home life is. I was in a big meeting of cross-specialty consultants, After getting my point across, the medical director told me how, for one so small, I can make a lot of noise. The men around him laughed, and I was marginalized in a single phrase. So when I kind of started my my research, my campaigning around sexism, etc., I very naively believed that this was just a problem as a junior. And as I got more senior and eventually became a consultant, I thought that I wouldn't have this issue anymore. But looking at this, we know that consultants still put up with this. And as women increase in age, we know that the type of sexism that they encounter is different. So when you are younger, and of an age where family and childbearing is a concern for society, not necessarily the individual. It's very much about belittling them in a way that infantilizes women. Whereas women get older, and this consultant was in a big meeting trying to get her point across. When they are assertive and successful and impressive women, they get the script slightly flips in that they become loud, noisy, overbearing, bossy, a bitch, that kind of thing. And again, not acceptable. You very rarely hear assertive being used as an insult for men. She's assertive, he's assertive. That's how it's said. That's slightly different change in tone. And again, it's holding men and women to different standards. And then the third one for this kind of section. As a junior doctor, I was on rotation with a consultant who was well known to be challenging to work with at times. At my end of rotation placement, his positive feedback to me was that he was impressed at my competence, especially as a female trainee. I've got absolutely no idea what that means. I've read this slide out multiple times, and I still to this day do not know what that's meant to mean. Especially as a female trainee. Why are women being held to a different standard than men? And also, this story picks out that this consultant was well known to be challenging at work. So why has that consultant not had feedback about how they deal with trainees? And that's to do with the culture of tolerance that we see throughout the NHS and throughout healthcare. So that's kind of like sexism spoken about. I'm now going to go on to the more extreme end of the spectrum. So again, just a bit of a trigger warning to anyone going to be talking about sexual harassment and assault. Some of the stories are a bit longer in this section and are quite graphic in places. Maybe not graphic, emotive is probably the right word. So if you do need a second, please feel free to take that time. But again, just some definitions. I think sexual assault is probably easier to recognize, and I think people are more likely to be aware of sexual assault having happened. The definition being a person is coerced or forced to engage in sexual contact against their will, or when a person is touched sexually without their consent. One thing to highlight with the definition of sexual assault is the touching can be anywhere on the body. It doesn't just have to be breast, buttocks, crotch. It can be anywhere on the body. And I myself have definitely been assaulted I've experienced sexual assault at work where someone has been touching my arm, my shoulders, and it makes you feel uncomfortable. You get that ick, you get that shiver up your spine. So just an important point to put across, because I think some people do assume it has to be breast, buttocks, or crotch that's being touched for it to count as sexual assault. When it comes to sexual harassment, this is a bit more woolly, a bit more open to interpretation. So it can be unwanted verbal, non-verbal, or physical conduct of a sexual nature. And that's including messaging, emailing, social media contact. This is an evolving situation as technology keeps evolving. But the effect of it is that it violates the recipient's dignity, or it creates an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating, or offensive environment for the recipient. So again, it might not be something that you can necessarily pop a pin in, but it makes you feel uncomfortable. And that feeling of being uncomfortable is what makes it harassment. It's not what the perpetrator intended, it's how you as the recipient feel. Again, harassment and assault are common. Going back to the BMA survey, we found that 56% of women doctors had experienced unwanted verbal conduct, so inappropriate comments, inappropriate jokes, within that 2-year period. And then looking at the surgical reports, 30% of women surgeons had been sexually assaulted at work, and nearly 2/3 had experienced some form of sexual harassment. So the figures that we're coming across are very similar, irrespective of whether it's all doctors, surgeons. And then just to put in a bit of contrast, looking at the male surgeons' experience, 23.7% of male surgeons had experienced sexual harassment, and 6.9% of male surgeons had experienced sexual assault. So sexual misconduct is a gendered issue. It absolutely, definitely affects women many, many, many times more than it does men. But that isn't to say that men are exempt from experiencing these issues. And it's an issue that affects everyone in healthcare. Unfortunately, predominantly the data that we have out there is very doctor-centric, and it's very surgeon-centric, and there needs to be more evidence out there. There are a couple of studies from the Nursing Times and from Unison that shows that 60% of nursing staff have experienced sexual harassment at work. That 60% figure includes from patients as well. So how much of that is interprofessional and how much is that from patients? I don't think the figure is broken down in the report. And then Unison did a survey a couple of years ago now, but they found that 8% of allied healthcare professionals had been sexually harassed within the year of that survey. So that's actually huge numbers. That's absolutely huge numbers. So it is a huge problem for non-medical, non-doctor staff members as well. And pulling on from that theme, here's a story from a female healthcare assistant. So while working, a male HCA would try to hold my hand and hug me, despite me saying no repeatedly. At the end of our shift, he asked me what way I walked home. I had to lie and say the opposite way because I did not want to walk to the bus stop in the dark and possibly having him follow me. This pattern of escalation, so trying to hold hands, trying to hug her despite saying no repeatedly, is what, this is harassment. A one-off is inappropriate behavior, but when it occurs time and time again, that is harassment. At the end of her shift, she's had to lie, walk a different way home. She's had to modify her behavior in order to make herself feel safe. And I think everyone can identify that, not necessarily in the workplace, but I think most women, if not all women, have held their keys between their fingers when walking home in the dark at night. God, I do that when I'm walking through the car park at work. It's because, you know, a lot of horror movies have that kind of scene happen. So it's scary. You know, but actually it shouldn't be on the onus shouldn't be on the women, the victims to make these changes. It should be on the perpetrator to just not harass. It seems really simple, but it's them who need to modify their behavior so that it is acceptable rather than harassment. When I qualified as a nurse in 2018, I went to work in theatres. It was my dream to be a scrub nurse, as my mother had been a theatre manager in the early 90s. I'd been qualified for 6 months when I was assaulted by a colleague whilst scrubbing for an operation. He touched me inappropriately whilst I prepped. No witnesses, just the two of us. I performed the surgery, then asked our hospital chaplain for advice. He told me to tell my manager, to which I did. An investigation followed and ended with he said, she said. I had to leave and he got to stay. There's so much to pick out of this. Theatres are a special, they have a special kind of threat in that people are scrubbed. You know, this scrub nurse was scrubbing, she was sterile. And when you are sterile, you can't defend yourself. We've got stories on our website from surgeons and scrub nurses who are scrubbed in that surgical field, and they are being touched underneath the drapes inappropriately by anaesthetists. You know, you can't defend yourself. That's actually a very vulnerable place to be in, particularly, you know, and that's where predators and perpetrators jump on that. And it can very frequently be one-on-one, no witnesses, just the two of us, he said, she said. These are themes and language that we hear time and time again. And it's just not acceptable. And it's really upsetting that the reporting processes that are there at the moment don't counter for that. And the end of this being that it was very upsetting that he got to stay and she had to leave. And I think that just adds into that feeling of not feeling valued, not feeling wanted by the organization that you work in. And again, that's something we see quite frequently when we read through our stories. As I was leaving the hospital, I noticed a consultant surgeon walking out the door just behind me. He was well known to be over-friendly to females. He followed me to the car park, grabbed me and tried to drag me into his car, saying he wanted me to try out the seats. He only stopped when another consultant surgeon walked around the corner and he released me. I ran. The next morning, I ended up anaesthetising his list. He made lewd comments all morning to the point that all theatre staff and my clinical supervisor assumed we were having an affair. I explained to my clinical supervisor what had happened. He laughed, called in some of the other consultants to theatre to joke about it, and asked me if I needed counselling, then told me to toughen up as it happens to a lot of the girls. Again, we're seeing that the perpetrator is well known to be over-friendly to females. Again, that culture of tolerance that we see throughout healthcare. She's been dragged into a car and this consultant only stopped when someone came around the corner. We don't know what could have happened there, but essentially she most definitely could have been sexually assaulted and at worst could have been raped. She's then ended up anaesthetising her perpetrators list the next day. So feeling unable to speak up, to advocate for oneself, very common. A lot of victims don't want to be seen as making a fuss. And I think that sentiment is then compounded when she has spoken up for herself, explained to her clinical supervisor what's happened, and then being humiliated in front of all of her colleagues and told to toughen up. It's just not acceptable, and it's really heartbreaking. So I'm going to quickly talk about the consequences, and then I'll move on to hopefully a happier ending. There's a huge impact on staff, impacts on career. I've spoken about before about how it took me a very long time to choose my career of emergency medicine, based on sexist beliefs, sexist comments, sexist advice, some other things as well, but different time. I'm not very good at keeping to time, so I'm a bit wary. We know that people who experience these issues end up with very low work productivity because they don't want to go to work, because they're scared, their mind is elsewhere, they're worrying about what's going to happen. We know that a lot of people resign from work. We know that there are feelings of guilt, of shame, concerns that they're not going to be believed. There's a loss of professional identity and a lot of humiliation involved around these issues. And there are some papers out there showing that this affects people's mental health. Not only the figures there, but from the stories that we have from our websites, when people come and talk to us at in-person events, we know that people experience anxiety, depression, PTSD. And unfortunately, we've heard of people who are experiencing suicidal ideation and self-harm because they've been subject to sexual misconduct at work. And then all of these issues, all these feelings, all these mental health problems then compounded because there are huge difficulties in reporting, and there is a huge fear about any repercussions if they do report. So it's just, trauma on trauma on trauma, and it shouldn't be like that. And flipping it onto organizations, we know that there's organizational distress anyway, working in a very stretched, overworked, understaffed system as it is. But sexual misconduct and as a culture on top of that adds to that distress. It adds to low morale. It causes high staff turnover, increases in absences, which then can cause the health service time, money, and resources, because they're having the healthcare in which these people work, healthcare services in which these people work, is then having to provide healthcare for them for their anxiety, their depression, their PTSD. We lose a lot of trainees, we lose a lot of students because of this, and it does cost quite a lot of money in terms of legal cases. And that's before you even think about how much money it's costing the NHS in terms of sick days, etc. And I know money to me is not the important factor here. The individual distress and the impact on the individual and the culture in the organization, to me, is what's important. But we do have to talk about the money, because that's how we get organizations to listen, unfortunately. So that's all the doom and gloom. How can we make a change? So Becky and I, Surviving in Scrubs, have been out and about now for just shy of a couple of years. We have written to all royal colleges. We have bumped heads with the GMC quite a lot. In terms of our campaign wins, there is now a clause in the rewriting of good medical practice that explicitly states that doctors will not sexually harass or assault their colleagues, which it's really upsetting that you have to spell that out for medical professionals, that they shouldn't be doing that. But that wasn't in there before. The old writing of 2013 was that you will respect your colleagues. And that's such a broad, blasé statement that it wasn't even worth writing. Whereas now we know they explicitly cannot sexually harass or assault their colleagues. And the hope is that once this comes in, it will have an impact on the tribunal process when it comes to the reporting and the accountability and punishment to those perpetrators. So we've done the GMC, we're very closely involved with the BMA. We've done a lot of mainstream and medical media in terms of talking about our own experiences, talking about what we want to see, what our recommendations are, which I'll talk about in a minute. And we've also been to Parliament, which is bonkers to me. So that's me on the top left with Becky over my shoulder, speaking on behalf of Surviving in Scrubs to the Women and Equalities Select Committee, alongside Tamsin Cummins, who's to my right, who is the chair of the Royal College of Surgeons Working Party for Sexual Misconduct in Surgery, who did that report back in September. Very odd thing to do whilst you're on mat leave, but you know, we're being heard at a parliamentary level, we're being heard at a national level. Those voices are bringing change. It is not that quick, but it is changing, and that's a positive. Another thing that we did as an organisation recently in November, is we published our own report. So Surviving Healthcare, Sexism and Sexual Violence in the Healthcare Workforce. The QR code for that is there. And what we did is we did a thematic analysis of 150 of the stories on our website. And the key findings are that there is evidence of systematic and institutional sexism and sexual violence within healthcare. There is a theme of significant power imbalance between powerful senior male staff perpetrating violence towards junior female staff members. Not necessarily all consultants, but I think it was 70% of the stories involved a consultant as the perpetrator. A lot of perpetrators are well known. They are acting within a culture of tolerance, while survivors are struggling to raise concerns. Again, I think these findings have been brought out from the stories that I've already spoken to you about today. There's institutional sexism that leads to survivors describing experiences of maternity and reproductive discrimination. Again, we've touched on that. There are aspects of environment unique to healthcare. So looking again at the theatre space, but also patients can get brought into these issues in terms of ward rounds. If a sexist joke is made, patients are brought in and they then can also display sexist attitudes towards female staff members. And there is also the other big finding that we found is that there is a result in risk to patient care. So we're finding that women healthcare workers are having their clinical judgments questioned, their decisions not taken seriously, their requests being ignored, and their referrals being refused because they're women. And that's not okay, and it's not safe. We've also compiled some recommended actions, which I'm going to quickly go over. So the big ones are that we need a lot more education on what sexism and sexual misconduct looks like within healthcare, as well as focusing on culture change, allyship, and preventing these issues. We need research into the impact of sexism and sexual misconduct on the healthcare workforce, not only trying to bring the lens towards non-doctors, but also we need to look at this from an intersectional perspective. We don't know how an individual's race or their disability or their sexuality, how those issues also impact on their experiences at work. From the parliamentary point of view, we're calling for an independent inquiry. We want party politics to be taken out of this. We know that the NHS healthcare in this country is a huge political issue. We want the party politics taken out of this. We need some independent overview of what's going on. There needs to be improved support for survivors with specialist sexual violence support from ISVAs, independent sexual violence advocates, in order to support people through the reporting process. We need a review of current policy and past cases so that healthcare employers can improve internal processes. And an introduction of specialist sexism and sexual misconduct policies. In terms of 5 and 6, NHS England are in the process of bringing a gold standard framework out for trusts within NHS England to in terms of a policy and also the reporting process. That is something that we as an organisation are consulting on. Can't say too much more about it, but there should be movement in the next few months on those. We also want to see an independent anonymous reporting system available across the whole of the NHS. The reason being that healthcare is actually, even though it's the NHS is the biggest employer in Europe or something, it's actually a really small world. Everyone knows everyone. So by making it nationwide, making it independent, you add to that anonymity and you protect people's psychological safety. So that is a big ask. We want reform from healthcare regulators. So we as an organisation had a meeting with all of the heads of the regulators for healthcare professionals in the UK. So we're talking GMC, NMC, lots of others, physios, dentists, osteopaths. I think there's about 12 or 13 there. So we've told them what our concerns are in terms of their investigation process, and we've got ongoing conversations with them about that. And a big one is that we need improved communication between all of these organizations. Employers don't talk to regulators, don't talk to the police, and all three need to talk to each other so that a perpetrator doesn't move from hospital to hospital to hospital, particularly if they've undertaken a criminal offence, which sexual assault, sexual harassment is. So in terms of fixing the problem, I'm just going to skip over to what we can all do because I want to ensure that you all have time for Q&A. I am a gabber. They seem like simple things, and they actually are, even though they can be quite hard to do. So start a conversation, talk about this. Where you don't necessarily have to talk about your experiences, just talk about the culture, talk about sexism, talk about these issues, talk about pregnancy discrimination or how difficult it is to have a family and do the work and all the other stuff at home. Just talk about these things. Look at your own working spaces. If you have like a leadership role or a role where you are more senior to some of your junior colleagues, you're dishing out jobs, do you ensure that training opportunities are equally shared between all trainees, all students, for example? Think about your own internalized thoughts. This is a big one. This is a huge one. I've had a real big light bulb moment. Bearing in mind, I'm up here preaching. I'm not perfect. I have grown up in a patriarchal society. I've spent 30 odd years in this society. So I do have ingrained sexism and misogyny within me, unfortunately. And it's come to light ever since I had a daughter, in that I'm very aware of quite gendered language that I use. So she is very inquisitive and outspoken, and she's not gobby and noisy. She's not nosy. She's inquisitive, she's curious, and it's just reflecting on them and making small little changes like that. They can actually have a real big impact. Speak up if you feel like you can, whether that be to your peers, whether that be on the behalf of your juniors, or whether that be all the way up to your medical director. Whatever you feel comfortable with. And lastly, lift as you climb. So if there are people behind you, so now, for example, I'm an emergency medicine registrar. I just got my dual accreditation in intensive care today as well. I'm absolutely buzzing. But I'm going to ensure that women behind me, the F1s, the F2s, I'm like, do emergency medicine. It's great. It's great. Just keep doing that. And these small things that you can do every day. You can do one of these every single day, make a huge impact on culture. Culture is the hardest thing to change. It's the longest thing to change. But by doing these little things every single day, we can make it better. And that's me. So thank you. I hope we've got a bit of time for questions. I think we do. But if you feel like you want to share your story with us, please do on our website. We're on Twitter, we're on Instagram. If you give us a follow, tweet, like, reshare, all that stuff, that'd be great. And if anything's been a bit close to home or quite triggering, on that right hand side is a QR code which takes you to the support resources that we have on our website. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Chelsea. Yes, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to either pop them in the chat, the Q&A feature, or if you want to come on the mic, you can use the little raise hands feature and we can bring you on to talk. Chelsea, I can see we've had one question from Laura, and she says, thank you so much for this afternoon. Have you done any work with medical schools? If so, what worked well and what didn't?
Yeah, so we're doing quite a lot with medical schools, actually. Particularly, so we've done quite a lot of work with Manchester, and I think we're going into Birmingham Medical School in June. But we've also done quite a lot of virtual talks in terms of highlighting what the issues are. So that's in terms of like at the actual universities themselves. They're always very well attended. It's really great to see like younger generations coming through and already being aware of these issues in society as a whole, and then how that extrapolates into work. Whereas when I was a student, I had no idea. I just had a eureka moment when I was like 27, and that's 27 years too late. So that's really great to see. But we're also talking to the Medical Schools Council. So we're trying to get something in writing in curriculum for this to be taught at all medical schools. Not only in terms of identifying what the issues are, but how to speak up, how to protect yourselves, how to advocate for colleagues. So that's a real big piece of work that we're trying to push forwards.
And just following on from that, we've had a question: how can medical students get involved, particularly ones that you have not mentioned or partnered with?
Get in contact with us. Easy. Just give us an email or just give us an email. I keep trying to be really good at social media and it's just not happening. So just give us an email and we can organize a meeting and try and, have a conversation about what would work. When we do a lot of talks for student societies as well. So that's a way that we can also can also kind of get into the door of universities. But more and more deans are definitely aware of us now. And we're really keen to, we're very much doing a top down and a bottom up approach and everyone in between. So we're very keen. So if anyone wants us to come and talk at their university, please just send us an email and we'll do our best.
I'll when I distribute the video, I'll send out as well all the links to Surviving in Scrubs emails, social medias, websites. In the chat, I have put the link if anyone was interested in reading the healthcare support, the Surviving in Healthcare report that was done by Surviving in Scrubs. I've just popped that in the chat as well if anyone wants to go ahead and read that. Does anyone else have any questions, or not even questions, any comments that they'd like to discuss? We've just got a few minutes left, so please do, as I said, pop them on the chat in the Q&A box, or if you want to come on the mic, then just pop your hand up. Just while some people may be typing their questions, I'm just going to pop my email and the link to our Eventbrite page, which is where you can find out about more of the programs and webinars we run if you're interested in attending any. And if you give us a follow, you can get notified whenever we launch a new program or a webinar such as the one today. And I've just popped my email address in there in case anyone would just like to get in contact about the work we do, or if there are any sudden questions that come to you after this, I can always pop them over to Chelsea as well, and we can get an answer over to you. Perfect. We can email, I just had a question, we can email you over a certificate of attendance if you would like one. If you would like one, you can just use that email address that I have popped in the chat, the catherine.breen@doctorsindistress.org.uk, or you can reply via the Eventbrite email that was sent out. I'll also pick that up and we can get you a certificate of attendance for coming along today. Chelsea, we've just received another question. Have you done any work with the GMC on FTP, query how perpetrators found guilty of sexual assaults are able to continue practicing/studying?
So FTP, for people that don't know, is fitness to practice. So going through that tribunal process, etc. This is one of the issues that we massively butt heads with the GMC. So we are trying really hard to understand what their thresholds are for certain limitations or not on people's licenses relating to sexual assault, etc. We've started a piece of work going through all of the cases that are published online. Not all of them are related to sexual misconduct, but we've started to try and have a look, and that's kind of our next research project, really, just trying to draw out what's going on, if anything's going on, and then hopefully taking it to the GMC. So we're aware that a lot of first of all, we're aware of a lot of the issues in terms of actually getting things to tribunal. That takes a really long time. And in terms of like when things happen at tribunal, that's another process that we have tried time and time and time again to get meetings with and talk to people about. And when we've been to meetings, they've not necessarily been that transparent. So there's work going on, is what I'm saying, is the short answer.
We've got 1 minute left. Chelsea, we've just had one quick question from a participant. First, they've said, thank you for such a brilliant talk and raising awareness about such an underreported and sensitive issue. They've also asked, are these slides available to be shared for those that have signed up?
Yeah, I can share most of the stuff on there. I probably won't include the stories. The stories are all available on our website anyway. But just in terms of they're quite sensitive, and it's just to be respectful of. So I've as part of our tick box, people have allowed us to share them on talk. They've not allowed us to share them, send them around basically, but they are online if you need them.
Thank you. So if there's anything else that we can share, I'll include them when I send over the video for this webinar. But you can see it is 1:30 and I can't see any more questions in the question box. So I think we'll wrap up today, but I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone who came to this webinar today, and a really big thank you to Chelsea for leading it. As I mentioned, I'll export today's recording and this will be sent to you via Eventbrite within the next week or so. So do keep an eye out for that, along with any other helpful resources that I can also send over. Again, as I've mentioned, my email is in the chat. Please don't hesitate to contact and reach out to me regarding this webinar or anything done by Doctors in Distress, and we'll get back to you. But again, thank you so much, Chelsea, for coming on today, and thank you everyone for attending. I hope you all have a great rest of the week. Thank you.
Thank you.